The air in our sun-drenched living room was so thick with the scent of vanilla frosting and fresh hydrangeas, it felt like you could taste it. Laughter, light and bubbly as the non-alcoholic champagne we were serving, echoed off the high, vaulted ceilings of the home Mark had insisted we buy. "A family needs room to grow," he'd said, and I'd believed him. My baby shower was everything I had ever dreamed of, a pastel-perfect fantasy brought to life. Every detail from the tiny pearl-studded cupcakes to the calligraphed place cards screamed elegance and care. It was a testament to the perfect life I was living, or so I thought. My husband Mark moved through the crowd of our friends and family with an easy, confident grace, a silver tray of mini quiches in one hand. His other arm was a constant, reassuring presence, perpetually finding its way around my shoulders, drawing me close to his side. He'd press a soft kiss to my temple, his voice a low murmur meant only for me, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Are you happy, my love? Is our little girl getting everything she deserves?" I would look up at his handsome face, his warm brown eyes crinkling at the corners, in that way that always made my heart flutter, and it would swell with a love so profound it felt like a physical ache in my chest. This was my life, the perfect husband, the beautiful home, a daughter on the way. I was the star of a real-life fairy tale. The only discordant note in this perfect symphony was Chloe, Mark's younger sister. She sat in a corner armchair by the French doors, nursing a single glass of iced tea, her posture rigid. She was a stark silhouette against the bright joy of the room, her expression a careful, unreadable mask of polite indifference. Our relationship had always been strained. I had tried, I really had. In the beginning, I invited her for lunches she'd cancel at the last minute with flimsy excuses. I remembered her birthday with thoughtful gifts that were met with a terse, "You shouldn't have." That felt less like humility and more like a rebuke. Mark always waved it away with a practiced, indulgent sigh. "That's just Chloe," he'd say, pulling me into a hug. "She's always been jealous of anyone I care about, ever since we were kids. Don't take it personally, honey. She just wishes she had what we have." So I didn't. I accepted his explanation because it was easier than confronting the strange, cold wall she kept between us. I smiled at her from across the room, a silent offering of peace, but she just gave a tight, almost imperceptible nod and looked away, her gaze drifting toward the manicured lawn outside, as if the party I was so proud of was a prison she was desperate to escape. "Time for presents," my best friend Sarah trilled, clapping her hands together with infectious glee. The announcement herded everyone towards the center of the room. I was gently guided to a large ornate armchair we'd laughingly designated the throne, a mountain of beautifully wrapped gifts piled at my feet. Mark knelt beside me, his hand resting possessively on my swollen belly, a gesture that made my mother sigh with happiness. "Our princess is about to be spoiled rotten," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. One by one, I opened the gifts, each one a little piece of the future we were building. There was a tiny pair of designer sneakers from my cousin, a handmade quilt from Mark's aunt, a high-tech stroller from my parents that probably cost more than my first car. With each unwrapping, I'd hold the item up for everyone to see, cooing appropriately, and offer heartfelt thanks. Mark was my hype man, my chorus, exclaiming over every single item. "Look at this, honey! Cashmere! Can't you just see her in it? We'll take her to the park, just the three of us, our little family." He was performing, I realized dimly, not just for me, but for the entire room, cementing his role as the perfect, doting father-to-be. And I, caught up in the warmth and the glow and the overwhelming love, was his most devoted audience. I felt a kick from inside me, a little flutter of life responding to the joy, and I placed my hand over Mark's. It was all real. This perfect moment, this perfect man. It had to be. The mountain of gifts had dwindled to a small, glittering hill. The floor around me was a sea of pastel paper and satin ribbons. I was just unwrapping a set of sterling silver baby rattles from Mark's parents when Chloe finally rose from her chair. She moved with a stiff, deliberate slowness that drew the eye, weaving through the guests who parted for her, as if sensing the strange, cold energy that clung to her like a shroud. In her hands she held a small, unassuming box wrapped in simple brown craft paper and tied with plain twine, It was a stark, almost defiant contrast to the glittering, ribbon-adorned packages that lay in heaps around me. She stopped directly in front of my throne, and the festive chatter in the room seemed to dim, a sudden, expectant lull falling over the party, as if everyone was subconsciously holding their breath. Mark's hand, resting on my stomach, tightened almost imperceptibly. "Chloe," he said, his voice a little too bright, a little too forced, betraying a flicker of annoyance. "Finally decided to join the fun?" She ignored him completely. Her focus was entirely, unnervingly on me. Her eyes, a shade of blue so pale they were almost gray, and so different from Mark's warm brown, were dark and unreadable, like deep water. She extended the small box. "This is for you," she said, her voice low and even, devoid of any celebratory warmth. It cut through the ambient noise of the party like a knife. I reached out, my fingers brushing against hers as I took the box. Her skin was ice cold, a shocking sensation that sent a little shiver up my arm. As I took the box, she leaned in close, her hair brushing my cheek. Her lips were almost touching my ear, and the scent of rain and something vaguely metallic, like old coins, clung to her. She whispered, so quietly that I was sure no one else could hear. Her words a sharp, cold dart in the warm bubble of my happiness. "He told me you'd know what to do with this." Then, just as quickly, she pulled back, her face once again an inscrutable mask. My heart, which had been beating with a gentle, contented rhythm, began to thud a frantic, nervous tattoo against my ribs. He? Who was he? Mark was right here beside me. The pronoun felt wrong. Alien. I looked at Mark, a silent question in my eyes. But he just gave a small, dismissive shrug, a look of patronizing pity on his face that was meant to include me in his judgment of her. "My sister, the drama queen," he mouthed, rolling his eyes dramatically for the benefit of anyone watching. He wanted me to laugh it off, to file this away as another instance of just Chloe being Chloe, but I couldn't. Her words hadn't been dramatic. They had felt deliberate, heavy with unspoken meaning, like a shard of ice pressed against my skin. My hands trembled slightly as I fumbled with the twine and tore away the brown paper. Inside was a simple, black velvet box, the kind that might hold a piece of jewelry. For a fleeting second, relief washed over me. Maybe it was just a bracelet. Maybe I was overthinking it. I glanced up at Chloe one last time, searching for a clue, but she had already turned and was walking back to her corner, her shoulders as rigid as a soldier's. With a deep, shaky breath, I lifted the lid. The room let out a collective, soft gasp, the sound of guests leaning in, expecting to see a sparkling necklace or a pair of diamond earrings. But there was no jewelry. Nestled on the black velvet was a single, tarnished brass key. It was an old-fashioned skeleton key, the kind for a post office box or a forgotten diary. It meant nothing. It meant everything. A wave of dizziness washed over me, a gray tide rising at the edges of my vision, and the cheerful, brightly lit room suddenly felt cold and menacing. I looked at the meaningless key, then at my smiling, perfect husband, and when I opened my mouth to ask what this meant, I found I couldn't speak. The air had been stolen from my lungs. I gripped the arms of the chair, convinced I was about to faint right there on my throne. The party ended in a blur of polite goodbyes and smiles that felt stretched and false on my face. I moved on autopilot, a gracious automaton, thanking everyone for coming while my hand reflexively clutched the small velvet box in my dress pocket. The cold, hard weight of the key felt like a tumor against my hip, a malignant secret. Mark was in his element, the consummate host, walking our guest to the door, clapping friends on the back, promising to send photos, utterly oblivious to the hurricane raging inside me. As soon as the last car pulled away, he closed the door and turned to me, his face beaming with satisfaction. "Wasn't that perfect, babe?" "Absolutely perfect. Everyone had a great time." He tried to wrap his arms around me for a celebratory hug, but I sidestepped him, a clumsy, jerky movement. I need to use the restroom," I muttered, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. He frowned, the perfect smile faltering for a second. "Everything okay? You've been quiet ever since Chloe gave you her weird little present. You know how she is. Don't let her get to you." "I'm just tired," I lied again, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. It was a long day, all the excitement. I think I'm just going to lie down for a bit. I didn't wait for a response, just fled up the grand staircase to our bedroom, the key a burning secret in my pocket. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I knew I couldn't rest. Chloe's words echoed in my mind, a relentless loop. He told me you'd know what to do with this. It was a message, a warning. But from whom? And why would Chloe, who seemingly despised me, be the messenger? My mind raced, trying to piece together a puzzle without knowing what the final picture was supposed to look like. The he had to be a mistake, a slip of the tongue. But her tone, her coldness, it hadn't felt like a mistake. I pulled the key from its box. Tucked beneath the velvet lining was a tiny, folded slip of paper, something I'd overlooked in my initial shock. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. On it was a handwritten address for a post office downtown, and a box number, 734. There was no more room for doubt, no more space for blissful ignorance. I had to know. An hour later, I heard the garage door open and Mark's car start. He poked his head into the bedroom, his keys jingling in his hand. "Hey, I'm running to the store to grab some things for dinner. I was thinking of making that pasta you love, with the sun-dried tomatoes. Need anything?" The sheer, stunning normalcy of it was jarring. It made me feel like I was the one going crazy. "No, I'm good," I managed to say, my voice muffled by the pillow. The moment I heard the front door click shut, I was on my feet, a frantic energy propelling me forward. I grabbed my purse and car keys, my hands shaking so badly it took me 2 tries to get my key in the ignition. The drive downtown felt surreal, like a dream sequence in a horror movie. The familiar streets of our city looked alien and hostile, the setting sun casting long, ominous shadows that looked like grasping fingers. Every traffic light felt like a personal affront, every stop sign a test of my fraying nerves. What was I doing? Was I insane? Was I about to detonate my perfect life over a cryptic clue from a resentful sister-in-law? Maybe Mark was right. Maybe it was just Chloe being dramatic, a petty attempt to ruin my perfect day. But as I pulled into the parking lot of the drab gray post office, a grim certainty settled in my stomach. I had to see it through. My heart pounded with a terrifying mixture of dread and grim resolve. I walked through the sliding glass doors, the little brass key clutched in my sweaty palm, feeling like I was walking toward my own execution. The post office was nearly empty, a cavern of bureaucratic indifference echoing with the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. The air smelled of dust and old paper. The walls were lined with endless rows of small, brass-fronted boxes, a silent, gleaming honeycomb of secrets. My gaze scanned the numbers, my breath catching in my throat when I found it, tucked away in a lower corner. 734. It looked so ordinary, so benign. For one last desperate moment, I almost turned back. I could get in my car, go home, and cook dinner with my husband. I could pretend this never happened. I could slide the key back into its velvet box and bury it at the bottom of my jewelry chest, a forgotten curiosity from my strange sister-in-law. I could choose my beautiful, perfect illusion, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I couldn't. The doubt, once planted, had taken root, and it was a poison I couldn't live with. The not knowing would be its own kind of torture. With a hand that trembled so violently I could barely fit the key into the lock, I opened the small door. The metallic click of the latch was deafening in the charged silence. My heart stopped. Inside, lying flat, was a thick manila envelope. No name, no return address, just a blank beige rectangle that held the answer to a question I was now terrified to ask. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds as I pulled it out. I retreated to the sterile privacy of my car, the engine off, the world outside muted and distant. I sat there for a long moment, just holding the envelope on my lap, a strange, preternatural calm settling over me. This was it, the point of no return. With a final, fortifying breath, I ripped the seal. The first thing I saw was a stack of official-looking documents stapled together. Legal papers. My eyes scanned the header, and the words swam before my eyes until they came into sharp, brutal focus. Petition for dissolution of marriage. My blood ran cold. The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh, as if I'd been punched. I couldn't breathe. My hands started to shake again, rattling the papers. It was all there, filled out in Mark's neat, precise, familiar handwriting. My name, his name, the date of our marriage. And then I saw the signature line at the bottom. He had already signed it. His familiar, confident signature. And beside it, he had dated it, August 14th. My due date was August 12th. He was planning to serve me divorce papers 2 days after I gave birth to our daughter. A wave of nausea so powerful it nearly choked me rose in my throat. I fumbled through the rest of the papers, my fingers clumsy and numb. Tucked behind the divorce petition were 2 printouts, one-way flight confirmations to Costa Rica, departing on August 21st, a week after my due date. 2 tickets, one for Mark Peterson, the other for a Jessica Albright. I didn't know the name, but I could picture her face perfectly. Younger, probably, unencumbered by a newborn. And then, the final devastating blow, the thing that shattered the last remaining shard of hope. At the very bottom of the envelope was a small, glossy 4x6 photograph. It was Mark, on a white sand beach somewhere, his arm wrapped tightly around a smiling, bikini-clad brunette. They were kissing, a deep, passionate kiss. He looked happier, more carefree, more genuinely joyful than I had ever seen him. The illusion didn't just crack, it exploded into a million pieces, leaving nothing but the jagged, ugly, undeniable truth. My perfect life, my loving husband, our shared future, it was all a lie. A carefully constructed, monstrous, soul-crushing lie. And I had been the smiling, oblivious fool starring in his production. I didn't cry. The pain was too deep and too cold for tears. It was a block of ice in my chest, and in its place something new and terrifying began to form, a resolve as cold and sharp as steel. I sat in my car in the darkening post office parking lot for what felt like an eternity, the incriminating papers spread across the passenger seat like the wreckage of a life. The sun had set, and the world was dark, but my mind was lit with a terrible, clarifying light. The shock had receded, replaced by a glacial fury that chilled me to the bone, a rage so pure it felt calm. He had planned this. Every loving touch, every whispered promise about our future, every conversation about what we would name our daughter, it was all a performance. It was a meticulously crafted deception designed to keep me docile and happy until he could make his clean escape with his mistress. And, I now realized, a significant portion of our money. He wasn't just leaving me. He was planning to abandon his newborn child with the casual cruelty of someone throwing away trash. The sheer, calculated callousness of it was breathtaking. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a premeditated emotional murder. My first instinct was primal, to drive home, throw these papers in his face, and scream until my voice was raw, to unleash the torrent of rage and pain that was building inside me like a pressure cooker. But then I thought of Chloe. Her coldness, her cryptic message, her piercing gaze. It all made a sickening kind of sense now. The he she had mentioned. It wasn't a pronoun slip. She was quoting someone, and if she knew about this, she was either a party to it or trying to warn me. Given the risk she took, it had to be the latter. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers still feeling numb and clumsy. I found her number in my contacts list and pressed call, my heart hammering against my ribs. She answered on the second ring, her voice clipped and wary. "Hello?" "Chloe, it's me," I said, my own voice a hoarse, unrecognizable whisper. I went to the post office. I got the envelope. I paused, then added the 2 words that said everything. "I know." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line, and then a shaky sigh, a sound not of annoyance or surprise, but of profound, bone-deep relief. "Thank God," she breathed, and for the first time I heard a crack in her carefully constructed armor. "I was so afraid you'd ignore it, that you'd think it was just me being me. I was afraid you'd believe him over me." Her voice trembled with an emotion I had never heard from her before, vulnerability. "Chloe, why?" I asked, the question hanging in the sterile air of my car. "You don't even like me. Why would you help me?" I heard her take another shaky breath. "Because he's my brother, and some part of me will always love him. But what he's doing is monstrous," she said, her voice gaining strength. fueled by a righteous anger that mirrored my own. He's a coward and a narcissist. He's been seeing this woman, Jessica, for over a year. He told me his whole disgusting plan a month ago. We went out for drinks and he was bragging about it. Can you believe that? Bragging about how he had you completely fooled. How he was going to wait until after the baby was born. Because, he said, no judge would make a new mother move out immediately, giving him time to clear out the assets. He said he was setting up the P.O. box to have his new girlfriend forward his mail there so you wouldn't get suspicious when credit card bills from her city started showing up. She paused, and I could hear the raw disgust in her voice. He asked me to go to the post office for him, to get the key and mail it to him at his hotel on his next business trip. He actually said to me, she'll be so busy with the newborn, she'll never even notice I'm gone for a few days. That's when I knew I couldn't let him do it. I couldn't stand by and watch him do that to you or to his own child. So I decided to give the key to you instead. When I whispered, he told me you'd know what to do with this. It was the truth. He did tell me that, just not in the way he meant. The pieces all clicked into place with a sickening finality. The strained relationship, the coldness, it wasn't jealousy. It was shame. It was her struggling with the hideous knowledge of her brother's betrayal. In that moment, the woman I had thought of as a cold, resentful rival became my only ally, the one person who had seen the truth and had the courage to hand me the weapon I needed to fight back. "What do I do, Chloe?" I whispered, the fight draining out of me for a moment, replaced by a vast, empty despair. "You fight back," she said, her voice firm and clear as a bell. "You don't get sad. You get even. You take him for everything he has." When I finally pulled into my own driveway, Mark's car was there. A single light was on in the kitchen. The house was filled with the aroma of garlic and simmering tomatoes. The scene was so deceptively domestic it felt like a violation. He was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio, stirring a pot of pasta sauce. He looked up and smiled when I walked in, the same warm, loving smile that now made my stomach clench with revulsion. "There you are! I was getting worried. Feeling better?" he asked, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Much better," I said, my voice eerily calm, the iciness in my veins a strange sort of anesthetic. The fresh air did me good. The ease with which the lie slipped from my lips scared me, but it also empowered me. Two could play this game. He had taught me the rules after all. I was just a quick study. For the next week, I became the Meryl Streep of betrayed wives. I was the perfect, glowing, expectant mother. I rubbed my belly and talked about nursery colors. I asked about his day and listened to his fabricated stories with a serene smile. All the while, a silent, furious engine was whirring inside me, executing a plan with cold, methodical, and ruthless precision. The day after my conversation with Chloe, I called in sick to my part-time marketing job, claiming pregnancy-related fatigue. Mark was solicitous, telling me to rest, to take care of myself and our little girl. The hypocrisy was staggering. My first and only stop was the downtown office of Eleanor Vance, a divorce attorney whose reputation was so fearsome it was said she made grown men weep on the witness stand. She was a shark in a Chanel suit, exactly what I needed. I walked into her opulent, wood-paneled office and laid the contents of the manila envelope on her polished mahogany desk. The signed divorce petition, the flight tickets, the photograph of Mark and his paramour. I told her everything Chloe had told me about his financial plans and his bragging. Eleanor listened without a single flicker of emotion, her steepled fingers resting beneath her chin, her eyes missing nothing. When I was finished, a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. "Mr. Peterson has made a critical and, frankly, amateur error," she said, her voice like gravel and silk. "He has laid out his entire strategy in writing, confessed his malintent through a third party, and has grossly, grossly underestimated you. This won't be a battle, my dear. This will be a dismantling." Her words were a balm to my shattered soul, a promise of righteous vengeance. Over the next few days, following Eleanor's explicit step-by-step instructions, I began to quietly dismantle the life Mark thought he had so cleverly secured. First, the finances. Because we had filed our taxes jointly and our main checking and savings accounts were in both our names, I had every legal right to the funds within them. Mark, in his supreme arrogance, had left a substantial six-figure sum in our joint savings, our nest egg for the baby, he'd so lovingly called it. I walked into our bank, my heart pounding, but my face a mask of placid calm. And, with the help of a very efficient bank manager Eleanor had already prepped, I initiated a wire transfer. Every single cent was moved into a new trust account in my name only. I called our broker and liquidated the stocks he'd bragged were our retirement plan. I meticulously documented every transaction, every asset he had tried to hide, using the information Chloe had given me about his secret offshore accounts as a roadmap for Eleanor's forensic accountant, who began the process of filing liens and freezing what we could. I was building a fortress, brick by painful brick, preparing for a war he didn't even know had been declared. Each signature, each phone call, was a quiet act of rebellion, a reclamation of my life and my daughter's future. I was no longer the tragic heroine of his story. I was the architect of his downfall. The trap was set. The pieces were all in place. Mark had just returned from a 3-day business trip to Chicago. A lie I now knew, as Chloe had sent me a discreet text confirming he'd actually been in Miami with Jessica, no doubt finalizing their escape plans. To welcome him home, I orchestrated a small, intimate dinner party. The guest list was carefully, cruelly curated. Just his parents, David and Mary. They were kind, unassuming people from a small town in Ohio who adored me and were beside themselves with excitement about their first grandchild. They believed their son was a saint, a belief I was about to shatter permanently. "It's just a little celebration," I told Mark over the phone, my voice infused with a sweetness that was pure poison. "To thank your parents for all their help with the nursery, and to celebrate you being home. I've missed you." I could practically hear him beaming through the phone. "That's my girl," he'd said, his voice gooey with false affection. "Always so thoughtful. I'll be home soon, sweetheart." The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. That evening, the atmosphere in our dining room was warm and convivial. We sat around the polished mahogany table, the one he and I had picked out together in an antique shop, and I played my part to Oscar-worthy perfection. I was radiant, attentive, the perfect daughter-in-law. I laughed at David's gentle, corny jokes. I asked Mary about her prize-winning roses, and I allowed Mark to hold my hand across the table, his touch now feeling like a spider crawling on my skin. He was at his most charming, the prodigal son returned, regaling his parents with fabricated stories of meetings and presentations from his trip. I smiled and nodded, my stomach churning with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and disgust, waiting for the perfect moment. Finally, after the crème brûlée was served, I clinked my water glass with a spoon, a clear, high sound that cut through the conversation. "I have something I'd like to say," I announced, my voice clear and steady, betraying none of the tempest raging inside me. The table fell silent. Mark looked at me, a proud, indulgent smile on his face, expecting a sappy speech about the power of family. "I want to thank you both for being here," I began, looking directly at David and Mary, my expression sincere. "Your support has meant the world to me. And Mark, welcome home. I know how much you love to travel and how much planning goes into it, so I got you a little something to help you with your next trip." My voice was honey-sweet. I reached under my chair and pulled out a large manila envelope, a twin to the one I'd found in the P.O. box, and slid it across the table to him. Confused, he took it. His smile faltered, then vanished completely as he pulled out a crisp, notarized copy of his own signed divorce petition. His face went bone white. Before he could form a word, I continued, my voice losing its warmth, gaining an icy edge. "I also found these. I thought you might have misplaced them in all your excitement." I tossed the copies of the one-way flight tickets to Costa Rica onto the table. They landed next to the cheese plate with a soft rustle. "For you and for Jessica Albright. I hope you both have a wonderful time." A horrified gasp came from Mary. David stared, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Mark's face crumpled, the charming mask dissolving in an instant to reveal the panicked, ugly man beneath. "What is this?" he stammered, his eyes darting from me to his parents, searching for an escape route. "This is insane." She's pregnant. She's hormonal. She's not thinking clearly." But his parents were staring at the date on the petition, the second plane ticket, the damning evidence. They knew. And this, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper as I delivered the final, fatal blow, is a photo from your last trip together. You look so happy. I slid the glossy picture of him kissing his mistress across the polished wood. It stopped directly in front of his mother. Mary let out a small, wounded cry and covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears of disillusionment. David's face turned a deep, furious red. He slowly placed his fork down and turned to his son. "Mark," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "What have you done?" Mark stared at me, his eyes filled with a new, dawning horror. Not of guilt, but of being so thoroughly and publicly caught. The perfect illusion was shattered, and he was left exposed, pathetic, and utterly alone in the wreckage, right in front of the two people whose approval he craved most. The show was finally over. 3 months later, the world was new. The crisp autumn air felt clean and full of promise as I pushed a stroller down a sun-dappled sidewalk in a different state, a different city, a different life. In the stroller, sleeping soundly under a soft pink blanket, was Lily. My Lily. She was perfect, with a fuzz of blonde hair and big, curious blue eyes that were all mine. The legal battle had been as brutal and swift as Eleanor Vance had promised. Armed with Mark's own premeditated plans, the testimony from a reluctant but truthful Chloe, and the mountain of financial evidence my legal team had compiled, his case had crumbled into dust. He tried to fight, of course. His lawyers attempted to paint me as a vindictive, unstable woman, but the proof was irrefutable. The post-dated divorce papers, the flight tickets, the forensic accountant's report on the offshore accounts he'd tried to hide. It was a public and humiliating evisceration. The judge had been openly contemptuous of his actions. In the end, Mark was left with nothing but his staggering legal fees, a fraction of his former assets, and the ashes of his reputation. His parents, deeply ashamed and heartbroken, had cut him off completely. They now sent tentative, hopeful letters to my new P.O. box, asking about their granddaughter. I was considering letting them meet her one day. Their crime was only loving a son who was unworthy of it. Chloe and I spoke every week, our video calls a ritual of laughter and support. Our conversations, once strained and awkward, were now easy and filled with the genuine warmth of a hard-won friendship. She had become my family, a true sister forged in the fires of betrayal. She had been the first person I called from the hospital after 12 hours of labor, my voice choked with exhaustion and overwhelming love for the tiny person in my arms. "You did it," she'd said, her own voice thick with emotion. "You and that little girl, you're free." She was right. The pain of Mark's betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but in its place, it had revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. It had stripped away the pastel fantasy and forced me to build a life on a foundation of truth, a life that was solely and proudly my own, for myself and my daughter. I stopped the stroller in a small, quiet park and sat on a bench, watching golden leaves fall from the maple trees, carpeting the ground. Lily stirred in her sleep, her tiny mouth curving into a soft, milky smile. I looked down at her, my heart swelling with a love so pure and fierce it eclipsed everything that had come before. It was a love that didn't need a perfect house or a charming husband to validate it. It was a universe unto itself. The pain of Mark's betrayal was no longer a gaping wound, but a faded scar, a reminder not of what I had lost, but of what I had survived and who I had become. He had planned to leave me with a newborn and a broken heart. Instead, he had inadvertently given me the greatest gifts of all, my incredible daughter, my unassailable freedom, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I was strong enough to be a mother, a provider, and a survivor, all on my own. The future was no longer a shared dream with a man who lived a lie. It was a blank page, crisp and white and full of possibility. And Lily and I were ready to write our own story.